Supportables, we did have a much more eventful week 2 than week 1. Certainly a lot more points scored. Definitely a bunch of different teams doing it, but I'll get to that in the next little bit. Actually, tell you what, I'll save all my clever stuff for the future. Let's just jump right into the NFL week 2 and then our scores. It certainly isn't new to say the NFL and fantasy football is kind of set up under the idea of equilibrium and balance. But we saw a lot of it in week 1 and now week 2. If you won your week 1 matchup, or even if you were in the green, I know I made a huge stink about this, but you probably had a Jet, a Bill, or a Raven, because those are only really the 3 games where people went off. And if you had those teams going into week 2, you probably lost, meaning that you're 1-1, unless it was Cook and Lamar who did just fine. But even Allen in a winning effort for Buffalo, massively underwhelming performance. No, if you wanted to win week 2, it is very likely you had a Cowboy, a Giant, or a Lion who probably cost you week 1 and then definitely won you week 2. Most of the takeoff performances, especially the surprising ones, came from that game. Detroit especially, an onslaught. And if we're looking at the Campbell-Johnson rivalry here, and if you don't think it was a rivalry, Detroit was up by a few touchdowns and they still went for it on 4th down. That's a bit of a statement, so bear that in mind if and when they ever play each other again. Although, let's be honest, it's not going to be this year. I don't think both of those teams are going to make the playoffs, at least put it that way to be nice. The other kind of standing issue, aside from balance, is certainly the imbalance of the injuries. Now, again, I could not be knocking on wood hard enough, as in several leagues I have McCaffrey, but running back so far has not been the position where people go down. Yes, a couple wide receivers and certainly a noticeable tight end, but obviously quarterbacks is definitely the story. Now we got Burrow, Purdy, JJ, Daniels, Fields, all either questionable or definitely out for week 2. Burrow for a longer time than that. And a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is sometimes when we give an injury a name, it's like hamstring strain. Technically, it's not really a strain. You've actually tore one of the 3 hamstring muscles, but it makes it sound a little softer. But no softer injury than turf toe that sounds like pinky nail replacement. But it's actually insanely painful. It is a full joint sprain, and it's really hard to plant anything on your foot, which is why if you're wondering why Burrow, they're saying, might be out for longer periods of time, it is not anything that is a mild ding. If you're looking at week 2 as well, just kind of reflecting on who's green and who's red, like I said, the best game of the week by far, surprisingly, was Dallas and the Giants. It certainly was not the Super Bowl rematch that people were hoping to be electric. I mean, for Kansas City, I barely mentioned them, and they're kind of not worth mentioning. I mean, sure, they're probably still going to make it, but 0-2 is pretty epic. Mahomes is fine, but I mean, one of his only receivers, and I whenever you're going to insult Travis Kelce, I get there's going to be a handful of Taylor Swift people. I am not saying it is connected to the fact that he got engaged, but since he's been engaged, he's coughed up at least one big play a game, essentially costing them both games. He dropped a pretty key one in week 1, and he didn't just drop, but kind of coughed it up to Philadelphia in week 2, which if you think one touchdown or one possession wasn't a huge deal, Philly if you haven't watched them, they're not kind of worth watching yet. They're like sitting with the new offensive coordinator in these massive jet engines and just taxiing around the airline. Hurts has not even thrown for a touchdown yet this year. And I know that's only 2 games, but go ahead and look at every other quarterback that has thrown for at least one. That's an offense that just hasn't gone off the ground, to carry on with my B-plus metaphor. Either way, heading into week 3, it's going to be tough to figure out exactly where we're going with or what's the plan. I do think if you've been watching a lot of the games, one of the other just kind of stories that you might be curious about, field goal kickers, why are they scoring so much more points? Well, the kickoff rules is a little bit messed up to essentially, if you are in Dallas, if you get a touchback and a first down, Aubrey actually has a shot. Dan Aubrey is to kicking what Happy Gilmore should have been to golf if it was real. He's just got this huge leg that suddenly has changed the game. Is that going to change our watching experience? Probably not. And do I have any idea what's coming up with week 3? Nah. Remember I said in an intro before, after 2 weeks last year, we thought the Saints were going to have a dynamite offense. So right now, courses can still change. We can't base too much on it. Now, we are probably looking at our rosters and trying to think, is this something that's going to be for the rest of the year, or are they going to snap out of it? Only time will tell, and clearly I have no clue. So let's just jump ahead and look at the scores from week 2. After a tough loss in week 1, Norcan rebounds big time for 174, our current league high, I believe, and Covering week one, that's not a huge accomplishment, but 174 is pretty decent, even if you compare to last year's numbers. How'd they do so? To be honest, more consistency. Yes, they had the wide receiver one. That's kind of the big one, 37 out of the gate, although we did have a couple receivers getting actually close, whereas last week we had the number ones and a lot of gap. This one, Neighbors obviously put up great numbers, but he wasn't alone. We'll get to a lot of those people too. Lamar, as I mentioned in the intro as well, one of the few that actually did well in both. He wasn't a QB1 in either. He was a QB4 again, which is I think roughly what he was last week. Then if we look at the rest, just a ton of solid outputs. He did also have the second best defense, I should say, but 12 for a kicker, good. Not exceptional, but definitely good enough. Took the right Denver running back, unlike somebody else I know. Looking at his bench, they made all the right calls. Not a whole lot to speak of there, as opposed to their opponent who left a ton on the bench. Daniel Jones was the quarterback 4. Ramadunze was the wide receiver 4. And as we scroll up, there's still some decent numbers up here. The defense 3 overall, just behind the defense 2. But some injuries to Bowers and some incomplete games from the wide receivers. Certainly not what they did in week one. Gibbs, you'd think, that's great, but considering what Detroit did, you kind of would have hoped he would have gotten the end zone at least one more time. Didn't really happen for the Raw Doggers. So Raw Doggers have had 2 okay weeks, but 0-2 to spare for it, as opposed to Raph and James, who do jump up to our number 4 spot by splitting and going 1-1. You're going to notice 1-1 is a trend, and even a weirder trend here. We got Team Kickass actually losing, but still finishing ahead right now with total points scored, 147, pretty decent in a losing effort. But Malacavs are the story here. They got their first W of the season to put them on the winner's board. Now, it was not their esteemed quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, that got them there. Goff was actually the QB1. That Detroit offense did go off, and then Taylor was the running back 1. So if you got 2 skilled positions and top of the heap, it's actually kind of surprising that they didn't get the overall number 1 here, because they didn't really have too much on the go that went sour, except their tight end and Chase to an extent. But other than that, they made some decent calls, but actually had some more points they left on the bench. It wasn't a huge week for running backs, so Stevenson did crack the top 5. Looking on the other side, obviously we got some tight end injuries, sorry folks. But if you look at the general performance, again, they scored fairly high. Chase, great again, wide receiver 3. Javonte Williams is looking already to be a steal after the first 2 weeks. Running back 4. I'm kind of hiding the person here. It was Fields, who now might be, it actually is determined here. It looks like he's out for week 2, but under 4 points. If he scores normally, this matchup goes the other way. So unlucky Kick-Ass, but at least you're only 1-1. And Jules and Lara got a little bit of luck, but 156 isn't a slouch either, so congratulations. Not too many teams at 2-0, so congrats, Jackie. And you're a solo owner, so congrats again, Jackie. How you managed Amon-Ra was our wide receiver 2. I told you there was a few people putting up big scores in the wide receiver front. In terms of the top 5, again, you don't have that many more, but Kelsey mildly underperformed. Everyone else just kind of did what they needed to do with a few overperformances. If you look at your bench, you did have some points as well, but no one that would have cracked the top 5 there. So overall, it looks like just a solid team, and you made some solid decisions, which gets you at the number 2 spot. Unfortunately for Fourth and Conquer, they did suffer the aforementioned turf toe. So you only got a few points out of your guy there, and now you're going to have to try and figure out some solutions moving forward. Achan's been a good solution, though, at the running back spot. He was the running back 3 this week. And that's kind of it for how you were managed to crack forward here. And as we look on your bench, not a whole lot there, and certainly not another quarterback. So we are wondering, did you already go into the waiver wire and pick somebody up? You're going to go with just one quarterback? I guess only time and your week 3 opponent to tell. But in the meantime, you're still 1-1, not so bad. And Jackie, congrats, 2-0, great start. Another team with a great start, Kelsey Maureen, well done. Now you are in 3rd place, but still, I would take the 2-0, obviously, considering I'm currently dead last, and I do not want to talk about my team right now. We can scroll through. Pretty crap. Yep, not a whole lot on the bench either, so There you go. That's what happens if you take a bunch of rookies. All right, going on to the winning team, and I'll spend much more time there. Now, Patrick Mahomes has been an interesting pickup. He hasn't cracked the top 5 each week, but I think he was 6, so he's just outside, which is not too shabby. James Cook, obviously your carrier right now. He was the running back 2 with 2 solid weeks in a row. Dak's actually a pretty good outing, but didn't crack that elusive top 5. I showed your bench. You did have some points there, something to think about moving forward, but 148, defending champ, plus Maureen. Congratulations on the 2-0 start. Joining me at 0-2, ball too well, looks like you fell. Actually, going into the Monday Nighters, there was 2 of them. I was pretty sure I was about to go back-to-back worst, and then actually 2 teams didn't manage to pass me. But ball too well, you're the ones that fell to the bottom of the heap. So 95 is our low scoring one for the week. We'll get in touch about what consequence you want to take. And if you look, I mean, your big disappointment's got to be Derrick Henry, who just ran for miles in week 1 and not so much in week 2. A.J. Brown continues to be a disappointment. I mentioned Jalen Hurts. At some point in time, they might choose to throw the ball, in which case I think you'd be pretty happy about it. You got to also kind of wonder your double tight end situation because you had the tight end 1 on your bench, but you started the tight end 5. Pretty big difference in points there, though. Just something to consider. Jameson Williams obviously would have been a huge bench total. Wouldn't have won the matchup, but it would have gotten you out of the basement and the consequence. Pamela, you are our number 1 seed. If you remember, this is not that unfamiliar. A couple years ago, Pamela was the number 1 for quite some time. In fact, the majority of the season. So this is just her returning to form. Drake May is turning to be a huge steal as QB3 this week, and he's put together a pretty decent resume to get started. We'll see how he carries into week 3. The aforementioned kicker, he was the kicker 1. He can hit from pretty much anyone's backyard in Aubrey, so well done on the pick up there. Made all the right calls pretty much, although some of those guys I do think are in line for future performances, but what do I know? I'm currently the last in the league. I guess my opinion doesn't so much matter. But yours does, Pamela. You're the number 1, 2-0 start. Congratulations. One last look at week 2 before we click and fast forward onto this week's matchups. We do have the battle of undefeated, so we will have a 3-0 team and a 2-1 team for sure. Could we have another 3-0? Well, it's looking pretty likely, but who knows? I might try and play spoiler. Everybody else is pretty much in the 1-0 spot, although we are looking at the bottom, whereas right now, Ball 2L is predicted to win. Let's see how that holds up. But either way, folks, it is never too late to make a run, but I'm going to go ahead and say, as someone who hasn't gotten the win yet, it's always nice to at least get your first. Well, I didn't follow through with what I said I would do. I said as soon as I land in Thailand, I would say my punishment and then try and do it as fast as possible. I thought about it, but I didn't do it, which is a horrible precedent to set. I will take care of it this weekend, and I will be posting on it. And Randy and Anton, you're up next. Anton, if I don't say your name right, you're going to have to correct me, so just let me know if you're watching these things. You should be able to do something, too, from where you're at, so if you want to let us know what you both are going to think about doing for your consequence in week 2, that would be wonderful. For everybody else, hopefully, week 2 was a lot more scoring. Hopefully that made it more exciteful. Let's see if it happens again in week 3. Best of luck, everybody.